The crystal goblets splintered across the mahogany table as Dale slammed his fist, a sound like cracking ice echoing in the sudden silence. "Get the hell out of my house!" he roared, his voice raw. Frank Miller sat frozen, his smug grin finally gone, wine dripping from his chin. The silence stretched, heavy and thick, leaving only the sharp scent of spilled Cabernet and a crushing sense of irreversible ruin. The burgundy liquid from the broken glasses bled into the crisp white tablecloth, staining it like a fresh wound. Dale watched it spread, his hand still stinging from the impact against the polished wood. Frank Miller, across the table, had been in the middle of a story, his voice slick and self-satisfied. When the first goblet shattered, his words died in his throat, and the faint smile he'd worn all night, the one that made Dale's teeth ache, finally vanished. "Get the hell out of my house!" Dale heard himself shout, the words tearing from his chest. The tremor in his voice surprised him, but the fury behind it felt ancient. A deep well finally overflowing. Frank's eyes, usually so calculating, were wide and unblinking, fixed on Dale. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the scent of good wine and the lingering smell of roast beef. Now, suddenly unappetizing, Dave and Barb sat stiffly, their hands poised over their plates, their faces pale. Susan, who had been laughing at Frank's last jab, now had her hand clapped over her mouth. Clara, beside Dale, gasped, her voice thin. "Dale, what are you doing?" Her question was edged with panic, not for him, but for the shattered illusion of their polite dinner party. He didn't look at her. Couldn't. His gaze was locked on Frank, the man who had spent the better part of 3 hours systematically chipping away at Dale's patience, his dignity, his very presence at his own table. "I said get out, now." Dale's voice was lower this time, a growl. He pushed himself away from the table, the scrape of his chair loud in the suddenly oppressive quiet. Frank, recovering slightly, reached for his napkin, smoothing it unnecessarily. He cleared his throat. Now, Dale," he began, his voice taking on that calm, patronizing tone he often used in the office, the one that always grated on Dale's nerves. "Let's all just calm down. No need for hysterics. Don't you dare patronize me, you arrogant prick." Dale snarled, taking a menacing step around the table, a clear path opening between him and Frank. He felt the blood pump in his ears, a drumming that drowned out everything else. All night, it had been a steady stream of veiled insults, casual dismissals. Frank had started with a story about a junior associate who couldn't handle a simple spreadsheet, glancing at Dale as he spoke. Later, he'd mocked Dale's choice of an old Ford pickup, comparing it to his own new German sedan, all while looking at Clara for approval. Dale had endured it, for Clara, for the sake of appearances, for the peace he craved. But when Frank had made a joke about Dale's recent work presentation being a little too folksy for the board, and Clara had laughed along with Dave, Barb, and Susan, something inside Dale had simply snapped. He rounded on Clara, his voice tight. "You're supposed to be my wife," he accused, the words tasting like ash. "But you laughed right along with him." The betrayal stung more than any of Frank's barbs. Her laughter had been a knife twist, a confirmation that he was indeed the butt of the joke, even in his own home. Clara's face hardened. She snatched her napkin from her lap and tossed it onto the table, a defiant gesture. "Dale, you're embarrassing yourself. Frank is my boss." Her tone was cold, practical, as if Dale's feelings were an inconvenience, not a legitimate hurt. "Your boss?" Dale retorted, the irony bitter in his mouth. "I was thinking my wife would have my back, not throw me to the wolves." He watched her face, searching for a flicker of understanding, but found only resentment. Frank, seeing his opportunity, pushed back his chair. The sound of wood scraping against the tile floor. He began to rise, attempting to regain his composure, to make a smooth exit. He adjusted his tie, clearing his throat again. "Veronica," he said, directing his voice toward the general direction of the other guests, "I'll see you at the office on Monday." It was a deliberate attempt to project normalcy, to imply that this was merely a minor disturbance, a momentary lapse in an otherwise perfectly civil evening. But Dale wasn't finished. Before Frank could take another step, Dale was on him, his hand gripping the lapels of Frank's expensive suit jacket. The fabric felt smooth, tailored. Dale yanked, pulling Frank forward, off balance. Frank stumbled, his eyes widening in genuine alarm. "I told you to get out," Dale roared again, the words echoing, primal and raw. He shoved Frank, propelling him toward the front door. Frank stumbled over his own feet, arms flailing, nearly tripping over the entry rug. Dale kept pushing, a relentless force, until Frank was through the threshold and out onto the cool autumn porch. Frank caught himself on the railing, steadying himself. He turned back, his face a mask of cold fury, his previous composure completely shattered. He pointed a finger, his voice low, venomous. "You'll regret this, Dale. You have no idea what you've just done." The chill in his voice cut through the night air. Dale watched him for another beat, then slammed the front door shut with a resounding thud that vibrated through the floorboards. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The quiet inside was absolute, broken only by his ragged breathing. He closed his eyes. The image of Frank's furious face burned behind his eyelids. When he opened them, Clara was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her face a storm. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice flat and cold, the sound cutting through the ringing in his ears. "What's wrong with me?" Dale repeated, the question igniting a fresh spark of anger, hot and sharp. He pushed himself off the front door, the wood cool against his back. "What's wrong with me? Your boss, Clara, spent the entire damn evening belittling me, from the moment he walked through that door. He made me feel like a dog at my own table. In my own home." The words came out in a rush, a bitter torrent. Clara rolled her eyes, a gesture that had become painfully familiar over the past few years. It was a dismissal, a silent verdict that whatever bothered him was trivial. Childish even. "Oh, Dale, please," she sighed, exasperation heavy in her voice. "It was just harmless teasing. God, when did you become so thin-skinned?" She adjusted a stray strand of hair, her composure returning as if the evening's events were merely a minor inconvenience. Already in the past. Harmless teasing. The phrase echoed in Dale's head, mocking him. He could still hear Frank's condescending tone. "Harmless?" Dale countered, his voice rising again. "He called me a simpleton, Clara. In front of Dave and Barb. He mocked my job, said I was stuck in the past. He made a crack about my clothes, my old sweater, saying it looked like something the help would wear. And then he even made fun of how I held my fork. For Christ's sake, said it was a Midwestern peculiarity." He could feel the sting of each memory, fresh as if it had just happened. He'd tried to laugh it off then, to play along, but the humiliation had been a slow, steady burn. Clara waved a dismissive hand. "You're being dramatic. Frank has a particular sense of humor. You need to learn to take a joke, Dale. That's just how he is." Her tone implied he was the problem, his inability to adjust, to conform. "A joke?" Dale challenged, stepping closer to her, his voice low and dangerous. "So our marriage, my dignity, everything we supposedly built together, that's just one big joke to you then? Is that it?" He searched her face, hoping for some sign of remorse, some flicker of understanding. But her expression remained stubbornly guarded. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked away, toward the dining room, where the remnants of the ruined dinner lay. "You know how important this dinner was," she snapped, her voice sharp with anger. "Frank is considering me for a major promotion, a huge account, a significant raise. You just cost us everything." The words hit Dale like a physical blow, sharper than any of Frank's insults. "Cost us?" he repeated, the phrase hollow in his mouth. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold certainty settling in his gut. There is no wuss anymore, Clara. Not after tonight. The realization hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. He hadn't known he was going to say it until the words were out. But once spoken, they felt undeniably true. Clara's head snapped back, her eyes narrowing. Her face hardened, all traces of her earlier annoyance replaced by a chilling anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Dale felt a sudden, profound weariness wash over him, heavier than the anger, heavier than the betrayal. He ran a hand through his hair, tugging at the roots. "It means I'm done," he declared, the words slow and deliberate. "I can't do this anymore. The constant belittling, the way you always take everyone else's side, how you always make me feel like I'm less than, like I'm not good enough." He paused, looking around the living room, at the familiar furniture, the framed pictures of their younger, happier selves. It all felt like a foreign country now. A hint of panic, quick and fleeting, crossed Clara's face, disturbing her carefully constructed mask. "Dale, you can't be serious." Her voice had a slight tremor. "You're going to throw away our entire marriage over one bad dinner party?" Dale scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. "One bad dinner party? This has been building for years, Clara. Tonight was just the final straw. It was just the moment when I finally saw it all for what it truly is." He remembered the quiet evenings he'd spent alone, her late nights at the office, the growing distance between them that felt vast and unbridgeable. Clara took a step toward him, her voice softening, a calculated change in tone. "Come on, baby. Let's not do anything hasty. We can talk about this. We can fix it." She reached out a hand, a hesitant gesture toward his arm. Dale shook his head, pulling back before her fingers could touch him. The contact would be a lie. "I'm done talking, Clara. Done pretending." The weariness in his voice was absolute. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix. Clara dropped her hand, her face hardening again. "So, that's it?" she demanded, her voice sharp and brittle. "You're just going to walk out on me?" Dale met her gaze, his own eyes tired but resolute. "You walked out on our marriage a long time ago, Clara," he said, his voice flat. He turned, the silence of the house pressing in on him, and headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to pack a bag," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the earlier anger. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight." I didn't wait for a response, just turned my back on Clara, on the ruined dining room, on the echo of Frank's venomous warning. The stairs felt impossibly steep, each step a deliberate effort. As my feet found the worn carpet of the risers, my mind began to drift, pulling me away from the immediate wreckage of the evening. It wasn't just tonight, I knew. Tonight was merely the capstone. The cracks had been there for a long time, subtle at first, then widening, until the whole structure had become unsound. I remembered Boston, 7 years ago, a crisp autumn day, the air smelling of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I was late, running late for a job interview at Miller & Co., a name that now tasted like ash. I'd rounded a corner, my focus on the glowing screen of my phone, trying to confirm the building number. Then, a sudden jolt, a spray of hot liquid. My brief, hurried apology was cut short by a gasp, and then a low curse. When I looked up, she was there. Auburn hair, the color of rust in the setting sun, falling around a face that was, even with a dark coffee stain blooming across her expensive blouse, absolutely stunning. Her eyes, green like sea glass, met mine with a mixture of irritation and something else, something I couldn't quite name. She was wiping at her shirt, a small frown on her face. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, then looked at me. "You owe me a new blouse, mister." "I'm so sorry," I stammered, fumbling for napkins. Let me help." I saw then the Miller & Co. logo on the coffee cup still clutched in her hand. My stomach dropped. "Wait a minute," I said. Are you from Miller & Co.?" She raised an eyebrow, a slight curve of her lips. "I am. And judging by that crumpled resume you're holding, you're Dale Thompson, my 10 o'clock interview." She looked at her coffee-soaked blouse, then back at me. A small laugh, bright and unexpected, escaped her. It was a clear, confident sound. "Tell you what, Mr. Thompson," she said, her green eyes sparkling. "Let's grab another coffee, and we can do that interview there." 2 hours later, I had the job. And a dinner date. That night, she told me her name was Clara. She was brilliant, ambitious, her mind quick and sharp. She had a wit that could cut. But in those early days, it always felt playful. engaging. I was instantly smitten, caught in the whirlwind of her energy. She talked about big ideas, about rising through the ranks, about making a real mark. I listened, mesmerized, seeing a future I hadn't even imagined before. Our romance was a blur of intensity. 6 months after that coffee spill, we were living together in a small apartment overlooking the Charles River. A year after that, I proposed on a chilly evening on Cape Cod, the waves crashing against the shore, a diamond glinting under the pale moonlight. She said yes, her voice husky, and I thought my heart would burst. The first few years of our marriage were blissful. We were a power couple, as our friends called us, both of us advancing quickly in our careers, pushing each other, celebrating each other's successes. We talked about having kids, buying a big suburban house with a yard for a dog. We painted a picture of a bright, shared future, full of laughter and purpose. The cracks started small, almost imperceptible at first. Clara working later, explaining it away as a big project, canceling date nights because she was too mentally drained after a long week. I convinced myself it was temporary. Just until she got that next promotion, then things would calm down. We'd have more time. I believed it, or wanted to. Anyway, I told myself this was just the price of ambition, of building something important. Then came the night I'd planned a surprise anniversary dinner. I had spent the entire day preparing. The fancy pasta dish she loved, the candles, the bottle of Chianti I'd saved from our trip to Italy. The reservation was at 7, a quiet little place downtown, the same restaurant where we'd had our first proper date. I'd even bought a small, delicate silver necklace, something I knew she'd appreciate. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:30. Then 8. I waited, the food growing cold, the candles burning down, my stomach twisting with a mixture of worry and a slow, creeping dread. I called her office, her cell phone. No answer. Each unanswered ring was a tiny chisel, chipping away at the quiet hope I'd nurtured all day. She stumbled in at midnight, the front door closing with a soft thud that startled me awake on the sofa. She was giggling, a light, airy sound, and the faint, sweet and sour smell of expensive scotch clung to her like a second skin. Her auburn hair was a little disheveled, her scarf askew. "Oh, Dale," she slurred, her words slightly thick, her eyes bright and unfocused. She saw me then, sitting up, the glow of the street lamp casting long shadows. "You should have been there. It was amazing." She dropped her purse on the hall table with a clatter, not noticing the empty wine bottle or the cold plates on the dining table. "Frank Miller just promoted me to senior account manager. We were celebrating. He's brilliant, Dale. Absolutely brilliant." She began to rave, her words tumbling out. She talked about Frank's incredible stories, his connections in the industry, the way he commanded a room. She recounted anecdotes from the evening, painting him as a visionary, a mentor, a force of nature. It wasn't just the scotch talking, I realized, but a genuine admiration, a starry-eyed adoration that made my chest tighten. I swallowed hard, the taste of stale hope in my mouth. I tried to keep my voice even, steady, though it felt stiff, alien. Did you remember what today was, Clara?" Her brow furrowed, a moment of silence as her mind seemed to catch up. The laughter faded from her eyes, replaced by a momentary blankness. Then a dawning realization. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice suddenly small. "Our anniversary. Oh, Dale, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot." She sounded genuinely remorseful for a second, her green eyes meeting mine, a fleeting glimpse of the Clara I knew, the one who would have been devastated. But then, almost immediately, her gaze drifted past me, toward the purse she'd dropped. Her hand instinctively reached for it, pulling out her phone. Even as she offered her apology, her thumb was already tracing circles on the screen, already thinking about work, about the new account, about Frank Miller. The moment of connection, of shared hurt, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I see it now. Looking back, the clarity of hindsight. That night was the beginning of the end, the first decisive cut. But back then, I was blind, or perhaps just unwilling to see. I loved her, I told myself. She was ambitious. She was successful. These were good things. I could forgive a forgotten anniversary. A late night. A little too much scotch. I convinced myself she would come back to me. To us, once the initial excitement of the promotion wore off, but it didn't wear off. Over the next few years, Clara's ambition didn't just grow. It consumed her. Every conversation, every spare moment, revolved around Miller and Co., around impressing Frank, around climbing the corporate ladder. Did you see the new numbers Frank pulled in? Frank thinks I'm ready for the next level. I really need to impress Frank with this presentation. Frank. She stopped asking about my day, not truly. She stopped inquiring about my quiet passions, the old woodworking projects I tinkered with in the garage. My dreams, the ones we'd once shared, faded into the background, replaced by her relentless pursuit of success. Her identity became entirely defined by her achievements at Miller & Co. By the approving nod from her boss, I started to feel like a secondary character in my own life, a static figure on the periphery of her dynamic, ever-expanding world. Our shared dreams of a family, of that suburban house with a dog, slowly dissolved, replaced by a stream of Clara's corporate milestones, each one taking her further and further away from me. The glow of the city, once so exciting, now felt suffocating. I felt like a ghost, wandering through the apartment we shared, invisible to the woman I loved. Boston, with its fast pace and endless ambition, had become Clara's world, and I was just a quiet fixture in it. The thought of leaving, of finding a different kind of life, began to take root. I proposed it one cool spring evening, hoping for a spark of shared excitement. My dad's been talking about expanding the firm, I began, my voice careful. Back in Ohio, he could use my engineering background. We could move back, Clara. Get that house with a yard, start a family. A simpler life. Clara didn't even look up from her tablet, where she was reviewing what looked like a budget report. Ohio? She scoffed, a dry, incredulous sound. Dale, my career is here. Miller & Co. is here. You know that. She finally looked at me, her green eyes cool and distant. You could find a new job. Maybe teach, if you're so keen on a simpler life. Teach. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. It felt like a dismissal of everything I had worked for, a quiet suggestion that my own ambitions were negligible, easily swapped for something less demanding, less threatening to her assent. A cold chasm opened between us then, widening with each passing day. I felt like she saw me as a distraction, an anchor holding her back from the glittering shore of her professional dreams. The apartment, once a sanctuary, became a place I increasingly avoided. I started spending more time at the gym, pushing myself until my muscles ached, trying to sweat out the gnawing loneliness. From there, I gravitated to local bars, not for the alcohol, but for the muted hum of other lives, the illusion of connection. It was in one of these dimly lit places, a neighborhood spot called the Rusty Nail, that I met Lori. Lori was a bartender, a woman with kind eyes and a steady hand. She was older than Clara, maybe early 40s, with lines around her eyes that spoke of genuine laughter and quiet sorrows. She listened, truly listened. I found myself talking to her about my day, about the quiet frustrations, about the slow erosion of my marriage, things I hadn't dared to voice to Clara. Lori would nod, sometimes offer a quiet observation. But mostly she just let me speak. She was a source of comfort, a gentle presence, a listening ear I no longer found at home. Our bond remained strictly platonic, built on shared silences and honest conversation. But the emotional intimacy became profound, a lifeline I didn't realize I desperately needed. Meanwhile, Clara's relationship with Frank Miller grew increasingly close, beyond the professional. They traveled together for work, often just the two of them, to conferences in Miami or San Francisco. There were late-night meetings at expensive downtown restaurants, always just Clara and Frank, no other colleagues. She'd come home flushed, buzzing with energy, full of stories about Frank's latest deal or a clever marketing strategy he'd devised. I confronted her one night, trying to keep my voice calm, reasonable. "Clara," I said, "I'm not comfortable with how much time you're spending with Frank. It feels Too close. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. She threw her head back, her eyes shining with derision. Are you serious, Dale? You're being so insecure. Frank is like a brother to me. He's my mentor. He's the only one who truly understands my ambition. She paused, her gaze cold. Maybe you should try to be more supportive instead of stifling me. I saw it, plain as day. The way her eyes would light up when she spoke of him, the casual familiarity, the almost physical comfort she seemed to find in his presence. It was obvious, but Clara's denial was absolute. A solid wall between us, impervious to any truth I might present. Life's choices have a way of unraveling, showing their true cost in the quiet moments. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The conversations with Lori at the Rusty Nail had become a hollow comfort. I was patching over a gaping wound with a bandage, and the wound just kept getting wider. Clara's odd behavior became harder to ignore. Secretive phone calls, her voice dropping to a whisper when I entered the room. More late nights, with flimsy excuses about unexpected deadlines. And then, the new perfume, a heavy, musky scent, entirely unlike her usual light, citrusy fragrance. It was the kind of perfume Frank Miller's wife, Veronica, wore. The suspicion festered, a poisonous growth in my gut. I debated with myself for days, wrestling with the morality of it. It felt wrong, underhanded, but the not knowing, the constant gnawing doubt, was slowly driving me insane. I needed to know. I needed proof, one way or the other. So, I bought it online. A small, discreet camera, designed to look exactly like a standard smoke detector. I installed it in the dining room, high on the ceiling, where it would have a clear view of the entire room, unnoticed. The waiting was agony. Every day, I checked the footage, my heart pounding in my chest, dread mixing with a desperate hope that I would find nothing. Then, one Tuesday evening, I saw it. It was Clara and Frank. They were in our dining room, the very room where we had shared so many meals, so many quiet anniversaries before the one she forgot. They were standing by the large bay window, the city lights twinkling behind them. Frank had his hands on her waist, pulling her close. Clara's head was thrown back, a smile on her face, a look of uninhibited joy I hadn't seen on her face in years. Then they kissed. A long, deep, passionate kiss. Not a quick peck, not a friendly brush. This was the kiss of lovers, full of hunger and desire. My world shattered. The air left my lungs in a painful gasp. It was a gut-wrenching pain, a physical blow that left me doubled over, clutching my stomach. Betrayal, raw and absolute. I watched it again. And again, seeking details, proof, confirmation of the unimaginable. Her hand tracing the line of his jaw, the way her body molded against his, the undeniable intimacy. Then, they started talking. Their voices low but clear enough for the camera to pick up. "He's getting suspicious," Clara said, her voice a low murmur. "I can feel it," Frank chuckled, a dry, confident sound that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry, darling. We'll handle Dale. We'll paint him as the jealous, unstable husband. We'll make sure he looks completely unhinged." Clara laughed softly, a conspiratorial sound that twisted in my gut. "He already seems pretty fragile, doesn't he? Always complaining. Always so dramatic." My blood ran cold. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting against me. They were planning to discredit me, to undermine my reputation, to take everything from me. My home, my standing, my very sanity. The cold realism of their conversation cut deeper than the infidelity. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was a calculated strategy. I confronted Clara later that week, the video evidence burning a hole in my pocket. She denied it at first, her face a mask of indignation. "Dale, what are you talking about? Are you losing your mind?" But when I showed her the clip, her face went slack, all pretense crumbling. She tried to rationalize, her voice barely a whisper. "It meant nothing, Dale. It was just a moment." I swear, but it wasn't just a moment. It was a conspiracy. The rage I had held in check for so long, the quiet frustrations, the years of neglect, all boiled over, white hot and uncontrollable. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. It was about Frank, about his smug face, his condescending jokes, his insidious infiltration into my life, into my marriage. That's when the idea formed, sharp and clear. The dinner party. I would invite Frank and Susan, and Dave and Barb. I would force them to sit at my table, in my home, the scene of their betrayal. I wanted to shame Frank. I wanted to expose Clara. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to feel the moral revulsion I now felt. The dinner party wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was my planned ambush. My public reckoning. The hotel room was sterile, impersonal. I barely slept. The anger had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. The morning after the shattered dinner party, I checked out, the key card feeling light and inconsequential in my hand. My first stop was a lawyer's office downtown. Mark, my lawyer, was a man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened, his face impassive, as I recounted the events, the slow decay of my marriage, the escalating betrayal, and the final, explosive dinner. He was cautious at first, nodding, occasionally jotting notes, but when I laid out my meticulously collected evidence, the discreet camera footage, the call logs, the damning emails I'd managed to recover, his professional composure cracked. A flicker of genuine surprise, then respect, crossed his face. "This is quite thorough, Dale," he said, tapping a finger on the USB stick. "More than enough for a strong case." I looked at him, my voice steady. "I don't just want a divorce, Mark. I want justice. I want Frank Miller to face the consequences. I want the truth to come out publicly." Clara, predictably, was furious. My phone rang off the hook, her name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Her messages were a torrent of threats, accusations, and venom. She promised to ruin me, to make sure I never worked in this city again. She called our mutual friends, painting me as a crazed, unstable man, driven by jealousy, but I had my proof, and a quiet confidence that the truth would speak for itself. Frank Miller, meanwhile, was scrambling. The shockwaves from the dinner party had reached his home, his wife Susan, and, more importantly, the upper echelons of Miller & Co. Mark informed me that Frank's lawyers had reached out, offering a substantial settlement, a generous sum to ensure my silence. "He wants to keep this quiet," Mark explained, his voice flat. "He's offering you enough to walk away, comfortable, no fuss." I shook my head. "No deal," I said, without hesitation. "I want him to face the full consequences, professionally, publicly. I want him to lose everything he thinks he's built on the backs of others." Later that week, I sent the most incriminating video clip, anonymously, to a local news channel. It was a calculated risk, a direct shot at Frank's meticulously crafted public image. I watched the local news that night, my heart a dull thrum in my chest, and there it was, a grainy image of Frank and Clara, in my dining room, kissing, followed by their hushed conversation about discrediting me. The headline flashed across the screen. "Prominent marketing executive, accused of affair with subordinate, workplace misconduct." The story broke like a dam, flooding the local media. Frank Miller's reputation, once unassailable, was utterly destroyed. The pressure from the board, from clients, from his own employees, was immense. Within days, he was forced to resign from Miller & Co., his career in tatters. Susan, his wife, filed for divorce immediately, citing infidelity and workplace misconduct, and ensuring she took a significant portion of his considerable assets. Clara didn't fare much better. The company couldn't afford the scandal, and Frank's sudden departure left her exposed. She was fired from Miller & Co., her ambitious career aspirations, once so bright, now lying in ruins. The irony was not lost on me. The very promotion she'd sacrificed our marriage for had led to her downfall. I faced public scrutiny, of course. My name was in the papers, my story picked apart and analyzed. But to my surprise, many people sympathized, Strangers sent me messages of support, sharing their own stories of betrayal. It was a strange kind of vindication. The public had seen the carefully constructed facade, and they had seen it crumble. With the divorce proceedings moving forward, and the dust settling on the public scandal, I started to rebuild. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to lift. I packed my belongings, leaving Boston and the wreckage of my old life behind. I moved back to rural Ohio, to the quiet comfort of my family's town. There, amidst the familiar fields and rolling hills, I began working with my father, building an engineering firm, brick by brick, a new foundation for a different kind of life. A life of quiet dignity, far from the polished, ruthless world I had once inhabited. The divorce proceedings were brutal, a grinding march through legal documents and emotional debris. But my evidence was undeniable. The video, the logs, the testimony, it all painted a clear picture. The judge, a woman with a weary but sharp gaze, ruled heavily in my favor, citing Clara's infidelity and professional misconduct. I got the house and a substantial settlement. Clara was left with little, forced to move back to her parents' home, her Boston dreams in tatters. Months passed, marked by the quiet rhythm of work at the engineering firm I was building with my father. The smell of sawdust, the hum of machinery, the tangible results of my efforts. It was a steady, honest kind of healing. I reconnected with Lori, the kind bartender. Our platonic friendship, a lifeline during my darkest days, deepened, slowly, naturally, into something more. We found happiness in simple things, working in the garden, quiet evenings on the porch, honest conversations without pretense. Lori moved into the house with me, a fresh start in a place that now felt truly like home. I learned to trust again, cautiously at first, but with an open heart. The pain of the past lingers, a faint scar, but it is no longer an open wound. I understand now that sometimes the quiet act of standing up for yourself, of demanding truth, can be the loudest revenge. Everyone paid a price for the choices made, including me. But my life isn't perfect, only real, grounded, and built on truth. The quiet collapse led to a new, stronger foundation. The finality of the divorce decree settled over me like a heavy blanket, a strange mix of relief and lingering sadness. Mark had delivered as promised. The evidence, undeniable, led to a ruling heavily in my favor. I kept the house, a structure now stripped of its ghosts, and received a substantial settlement, enough to make a clean start. Clara, stripped of her career and her carefully built life, was forced to move back to her parents' home. A hollow victory for me, but a consequence nonetheless. Months turned into seasons. The engineering firm with my father began to thrive, the honest work of building and creating a balm for old wounds. Lori became a constant, quiet presence. Our conversations, once confined to the hushed intimacy of a bar, moved to the comfort of my living room, then the shared space of our kitchen. Her steady understanding, her easy laugh, slowly coaxed my guarded heart back to life. We moved into the house together, not with the whirlwind romance of my past, but with a quiet, deliberate hope, building a life on shared respect and a hard-won trust. The past remains, a faint scar, a reminder of what was lost and what was learned. I carry the memory of the betrayal, the humiliation, but the sting has faded. I understand now that some victories are quiet, found not in grand gestures, but in the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding, of choosing honesty over pretense. Life isn't perfect, but it's real, grounded in the fertile soil of Ohio, built on truth, not the glittering, fragile facade of ambition. The quiet collapse led to a new, stronger foundation.